Thanks, Lascan. I'm delighted to be able to speak in support of this motion tonight on the right to the Personal Assistance Service. There's been a long struggle, of course, as the Minister well knows, in particular in our constituency in Dublin Bay North, for the recognition of a personal assistance service and support with appropriate funding. I think he'll remember, and I recall in particular, Mr Martin Naughton of Connemara and Baldoyle, and his lifelong campaign for disability rights. He did groundbreaking work with Ashna Takirta, the Irish Wheelchair Association and the Muscular Dystrophy Association. He was also integral to the establishment of the first Centre for Independent Living in Ireland. And of course he was also involved very much in the Disability Federation of Ireland. And sadly, of course, Martin died in October 2016, aged just 62 years. But I had the pleasure of meeting him then just before that at the North Dublin Disability Forum event, which the Minister will remember on the 29th of March of that year. Martin's struggle, of course, goes on, Minister, and tonight we are renewing it and asking for definitive steps to ensure that this service is provided to all of our citizens with disability. The fight, of course, is continued now by excellent advocates such as Shelley Gaynor, James Cawley, Joan Carty, the Irish Wheelchair Association, the Independent Living Movement Ireland, the Disability Federation of Ireland and many others. And you might have read Lascan James Cawley's opinion piece in the Journal last Saturday where he told us that assistance is often, the personal assistance services, it's often the difference between existing and living. Personal assistance, of course, are not carers, and the service shouldn't be conflated with home help or care providers. People with disability who are in receipt of the personal assistance services, they've described, I think, in informative and moving presentations to us in the AV room many times in this stall, Minister, their personal assistance more or less as their, and I quote, their limbs. Their personal assistants are there to assist them, of course, with everyday things such as household chores, travel, work, parenting. They're assisting them really in living independent lives, which has to be the absolute objective. But sadly, Minister, in your watch and in the previous austerity government's watch, only 1.6 million hours were delivered to 2,535 people in 2018 and only 1.5 million to 2,470 people in 2017. Most importantly, HSE data on the 2017 figures showed that almost 85% of the people in receipt of a personal assistance service on average received under 3 hours per day, with 44.4% only receiving an average 42 minutes. You've delivered 42 minutes a day, Minister. That's the reality of your record in this department. So is it fair, Minister, that some citizens, they're only allowed use of, to refer to the earlier quote, the use of their limbs for 42 minutes a day? It's appalling to think that people who want the service and aren't receiving enough time each day for it to make a material difference in their life, such as allowing them to work, study, train, raise a family, use their, their computers and contribute widely to the whole of our society. Our motion is calling on the government first and foremost to consult, to talk to and closely consult citizens with disability and the disability advocacy organisations in policy development as outlined in Article 4.3 of the United Nations CRPD, which we of course ratified in March 2016. And I do note that, Minister, that it was ratified. And of course it states that state parties, and I quote, state parties shall closely consult with and actively involve persons with disabilities, including children with disabilities, through their representatives organisation. So we're asking the government to engage with the review being undertaken by the National Disability Inclusion Strategy 2017 to 2021. Action 6971 of the strategy relate to independent living to, and I quote, achieve maximum independence for disabled people in Ireland. I'm also asking you, I think, Minister, every time we get a chance to talk about this important issue, and I know you have a deep interest in it as well, but we're always still asking you to sign and implement the optional protocol. And you notice it there, it's in our motion. Sign the optional protocol of the United Nations Convention to commit to expenditure on disability services, like personal assistance, and it's something, as I said, I've called for, and we've all called for on these benches week after week in this stall. Without the right actually to complain about the lack of services and to therefore have the government do something about it, signing the convention, it was just a PR opportunity. You're not actually delivering. So in essence, Minister, what our motion motion recognises what we desperately need is a Commissioner for Independent Living to be established within the Department of Social Protection, who is tasked with consulting with an advocacy organisations to define personal assistance service in Ireland. That Commissioner should also be tasked with facilitating the separation of the personal assistance service from home help, establishing a roadmap towards the provision of totally ring-fenced funding for personal assistance services, and introducing a single standard assessment of need across all HSE CHO areas, and ensuring that any new legislation or government policy on independent living conveys the right to access a personal assistance service in this country, so that disabled people have choice, control and freedom to participate in society as equals among other functions. I think you told me, Minister, on the January 15th, you said that, and I quote, no additional funding was provided in budget 2019 for personal assistant hours. However, the HSE's National Service Plan aims to provide 1.63 million hours of personal assistance to almost 2,500 people. But it's amazing that, of course, the HSE almost magically was providing 170,000 more personal assistant hours when you didn't ensure at the budget discussions that we actually got more ring-fenced direct funding for personal assistance services. It was, of course, the outstanding Ms Joan Carty, the advocacy officer with the Irish Wheelchair Association, who brought this anomaly to my attention after budget 2019, and then we set about trying to get some answers from your department and the HSE. Minister, of course, when you do look back to the statistics from 2013, the amount of hours given to the service over year after year, the amount of people who got it, I mean, it is incredibly disappointing given the numbers of people whom we are seeking to represent tonight, as Deputy Pringle has pointed out. Obviously, I know Dr Colin Morgan, in some of the informative replies he sent on to me on foot of questions, Minister, when directed to by your office, I know, he said to me on his reply, he said, and I quote, "The level of service delivered is varied to ensure that each client's needs are reflected. Therefore, there is no average agreed number of PA hours per person." But he said it's recognised that many would benefit from more support hours. Well, that's one of the understatements of the century, Minister. And he also confirmed, of course, sometimes hours will be taken away from some people to provide hours to another person, because he says, and this is a key point, and this is the way your government has been operating, because he says the resources for a personal assistance service are finite. Very important word, Minister. They're finite, and a very disappointing word that there are finite resources. When we have a Minister for Disability Services, and research, I think, as far back as 1996 showed that an average of 10 hours per week would only respond to personal care needs and not to improving the quality of life or enabling people to participate fully in society. And you previously said also that the PA service provided by the HSE adheres to the principles laid out in Article 19 of the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, but disappointingly you ended that PQ reply, Minister, to me by saying, and I quote, "I have no plans for legislation governing the rights, entitlements and operations associated with this service." End quote. But have you not read the excellent literature, Minister, evidence-based research provided by the advocacy groups? The Independent Living Movement Ireland has worked with the Centre for Disability Law and Policy in NUI Galway on extensive research around international best practice on this matter. Research examined 4 options to achieve a right to personal assistance in Ireland: standalone legislation, a comprehensive right to community care and support, legislation for personalised budgets, and the commencement of the Disability Act 2005. But the overall recommendation was to follow Sweden, as Deputy Pringle has said, as an exemplar of personal assistance services in Europe and the world, and introduce standalone legislation but that a significant amount of work around eligibility, scope, access and use would need to be completed to ensure the legislation was fit for purpose, fully inclusive and accessible, and wasn't just another set of promises which haven't actually delivered. I didn't get a chance last can just to talk about the opportunities for work and education of citizens with disability, but it is very, very disappointing, Minister, when you look at statistics that, for example, the lowest rates of unemployment for people with disabilities across the EU, know that Ireland, in the country reports, Ireland has one of the lowest rates of unemployment, one of the highest rates of poverty for citizens with disability, and again, unfortunately, all of this is happening on your watch. So, in conclusion, I welcome Fianna Fáil's support for a motion, and I'd like to thank Ms Jodie Neary, Personal Assistant for our Parliamentary System with Deputy Pringle's office, for the outstanding work that she's done on the motion. So I look forward, Can, to the debate, hope that we can move forward in this important equality and rights issue, and that a properly resourced personal assistance service will be a core pillar of Ireland's social policy as we move into the future. Thanks.
I now call on